Welcome to another modelling video. What I'm going to do here is take some of these freshly painted Dacians and, shall I say, what's the polite way of putting this, renovated old Dacians, and we're going to put them on some bases. The style of basing is important. What I'm trying to do, I based up some miniatures for Test of Honour, and this is a little bit different to the way I'd normally do it, but I really like the effect that I've created with these, and I just thought it might be interesting to show you how I go about creating bases that look like this, and maybe something in here will spark some interest for you in terms of what you're doing with your own miniatures. First thing to point out is that the new Dacians are actually some of the Warlord miniatures. The older figures are predominantly Old Glory. There's a couple of Foundry type figures in there from their range. This is going to comprise a unit of 30 archers. The bases I'm using are sort of MDF laser cut bases. The rules I'm using, show my age now, WRG 6th, require each of these miniatures light medium infantry basing to be 20mm frontage by 30mm depth. These models are actually the sort of new resin models. First bit of a departure for me really. I don't really have miniatures that aren't metal. Don't find plastics particularly easy to work with. Don't find the end result pleasing. Of course, it's a personal choice. Resins are sort of somewhere in between. They still unfortunately have that light quality that plastic has, but they certainly do have, as you can tell from here, a more realistic sculpting style than many of the plastic miniatures that you'll find. Just to keep things proportionate, what I'm going to do is mix these around so that we get a mixture of figures. It may be a little bit jarring, some of the quality of the figures that I painted previously, which was many moons ago, contrasts quite poorly with some of my newer miniatures. However, what I'll do is I'll put them all together, see what the units look like, and maybe there's enough room on these bases to perhaps do some touching up if I can improve the overall look. The basing, to be quite honest, will do an awful lot to make them seem consistent. So I thought I'd just start by saying that what I'm going to do is operate these in 3 ranks of 10. You need to remove figures for WRG. The reason I'm going for 3 ranks of 10, although they only shoot in 2 ranks, is that part of the reason for putting them in a unit of 30 is to give them a little bit more resilience, not necessarily to worry too much about the shooting power. Of course, I can always expand out and fight 2 ranks of 15, or sorry, fire 2 ranks of 15 if I need to, but predominantly I'm looking at putting figures together in batches of 10. And what I like to do, I certainly don't like regular organised units where there are just single poses. I like my figures to be a little bit more dynamic, and particularly with archers I think that's perfectly fine. So what I'm going to start doing, the first job for me is to try and lay out what might be a pleasing arrangement, and I'm just going to start by mixing figures around. This is a sort of wounded comrade figure. I think I'll probably put those in the 3rd rank, so I'll put those to one side. Just generally sort of mix things around a bit. Don't worry too much about what we're going to do just yet. 4. Okay, let's put that one in the middle there. Basically what I'm just trying to do is spread these out a little bit so that we don't have repeating figures close to each other if there are any. We get a real mixture of poses. So that's going to go in the rear rank. Let's try and use some of these around a bit more. Up to you how you organise yourselves, but as I say, I like to quite a lot of variety with my figures. So I've got 3, 6, 9, 10 in the second, 3, 6, 9, 10 in the third, and obviously 10 in the front. And what I'll start doing now is looking at the colour combinations. So you can see here that I've got very green figures together, so I don't like that. We'll be moving some of those around. I do want to replace that with another resin figure though, because obviously he'll be next to a metal figure. This is obviously a leader figure. Now, I don't think it matters where that leader goes, but again, perhaps not too keen on the fact that he's looking to his left. So that clearly to me that looks like there should be a miniature somewhere about. So what I'm going to do is revisit that positioning and then take this miniature into a place where perhaps he's more centrally aligned. So I've got metal resin, metal resin, metal resin, metal resin, sorry, metal resin and metal. Now there are more metal figures anyway, but do I want to consider that this figure is quite red? This is one of the poorer figures as well, if I'm brutally honest. So I'm going to swap that guy for that one, move that one into there. We've now got quite close miniatures there, so I'm going to put that along there like that. Then for my own basing scheme, I'm going to go 3, 2, 2, 2, 1. So these three are going to have, if I left these as they are, they would have 2 resin figures. So maybe it would be a good option to just move that along and use that wounded figure pair alongside that one. Okay. So again, trying to think about different positions and different sort of arrangements, keeping things light. I've got a resin miniature on the end here that will be the single base. Now that might be problematic because it's going to fall over with a lack of its own weight, if that makes sense. So just having a little think about what we could do with that one. We've got 2 there, which is metal and resin, 2 there, metal and resin. These 2 are both metal. So what I might do is move this one into here and that one over there. And if I swap those around, the only consideration we've got is whether I'm happy with that general mix. And so if we line them up, we can see where those figures are as well. Yeah, that's pretty good. Obviously I'm doing this upside down, so you may spot some problems that I haven't spotted. But I think in terms of general look and arrangement, that's going to be fine. So what do I do now? Well, I take the bases. I said I'm going to go for this sort of arrangement. Now, if this were a slightly more challenging basing size, we might very well have to consider very carefully where the miniatures go. But fortunately, there's plenty of room, usually on a 20mm frontage, to start thinking about these just fitting nicely like that. And again, oops, we want our 3 there, 2, oops, excuse me, 2, 2 and a 1. And at the top here, we're going to do the same. Let's just move those back a bit. Again, not quite so easy upside down as it were. but you can get the general idea here. Now sometimes the miniatures will fall over, which can make this a bit annoying, and you'll have to obviously lay it down and only put it in position when you're ready to glue. I'm just looking to see whether the general sort of coloration now is something that I'm interested in, I'm happy with, or whether I should be considering any particular moves. And I'm also checking poses and general sort of positioning. So the only comment I would make is that I've got a figure pose here and here that are very similar. So I'm going to look around for someone as an alternate figure to this one. Given that this is the front rank, I think I'm going to swap that metal figure over like that. And perhaps just move that one into there a little bit, move that one around there. So again, if there's any sort of indication that models are the same, we just want them a little bit far enough apart that the eye isn't drawn to them straight away. As I said, the general sort of theme here will improve once we base up these figures. I've just spotted actually that this one here is one of the old school miniatures that I painted. You'll notice that very bland coloration, compare and contrast with this miniature. So I was going to have some kind of standard in the unit, but I think I'm going to revisit this figure entirely and repaint him to improve the standard. So as an alternative, I've got this miniature here, which has been very crudely washed, as you can see, with a dark coat just to blend them in a bit. And I'm going to pop him there and use that as the unit standard. Next step is to make a choice of glue. If you use a white glue, PVA, you'll make life in the long run a lot easier if you ever sort of consider rebasing your armies. I tend not to rebase, so I tend to use a super glue. This is a Gorilla Glue. Obviously loads are available, but I like this one because this is the gel variety, which means it will stick around a little bit longer and not immediately run away or run all the way onto your fingers. So I'm just shaking the bottle to activate the glue. And I always use safety specs when I'm gluing with super glue, just because I find that the glue will irritate your eyes if you look over it. And again, not ideal here because I would normally be at a slightly different angle, but we're going to do that. Super glue is fine. Super glue will work for the resin and the metal alike. We're trying to convey some activity in the way that we're aligning these. So feel free to look at the positioning and consider how they might orientate themselves. I'm just going to quickly run down these, glue them all. Super glue can be moved around a bit if you spot an issue or a problem, but obviously once you've let it dry, you'll need a strong knife can actually prise the miniature off the base, but hopefully I won't be doing that for quite some time, if at all. And I'd rather have the durability of the super glue bond short term. I find standard bearers are normally the ones where if you're going to have a problem with the weight of the miniature, they're the ones that will manifest that problem, simply because they've got the extra weight on top in terms of the standard. That one's fine. A bit of irregularity in terms of positioning is fine. You just need to consider the miniatures behind and how they're going to fit in with the unit itself. As I say, this is a very easy glue because we don't have to consider that too much, because these miniatures really aren't going to butt into each other at all, given the relative size of the base compared to the size of the figures. We'll take the leader figure, but it's really important to let the super glue dry fully before you start doing much else. Otherwise you'll see from later phases, you'll pick up super glue on a paintbrush and it will ruin the brush and pretty much stop the whole process. So having glued all of those, we're going to give those, well, I'll probably just leave them overnight just to let them dry. Welcome back. Just a bit of a follow-up on the basing. We left you last time with these nicely glued to their bases. Next stage, very simple. Grab some undercoat. Myself, I personally use an Aviello colour English uniform. Pop it into a little receptacle. Sorry if that's a bit shiny. Very simple process. Give the paint some shake. Put it into your preferred container, and then all we're trying to do is cover nicely around the base. I tend to paint inside out, so obviously paint the elements nearest the figure first. And this, because I'm rebasing some old figures, there's some slight residue left from where I cleaned the bases off. If you use a black undercoat, you can get quite a nice little effect by lining around. But to be honest, once you apply some base material, any sort of imperfections will rapidly disappear. I've gone over the edge there. I do try and keep the edges clean. It's just a matter of choice really as to whether you go ahead and paint the edges or just run up to the side, so I tend to do. I just quite like the defined effect from the laser cut bases, but feel free to just roll over it with something like the English uniform or an equivalent. Some people use darker brown. The reason we won't be doing that will become apparent when we move on to some subsequent stages. Obviously it's a little bit more difficult for me in this particular mode because I'm working sort of upside down and a little bit far away. But the general principle is we're trying to just get a nice even coverage around all the base without going too far over the edge. Okay, and we want to make sure that we get under there if we can, but we're going to put some basing material on shortly, which will cover up most of that. But that's the overall sort of effect we're looking for. So I'm just going to continue now and do the remaining figures. Okay, once the basing paint has had time to dry, we're ready for the next stage. what we do here is simply take our miniature. I'm going to apply some white glue around the base, and you can buy specialist basing glue. I tend to use just a PVA, something similar. Depending on the size of the base, I'll either apply straight with a paintbrush, or as in this particular case, just spreading a generous amount around the base. What we're trying to do is fill in that sort of line that you get between the depth of the figure's base and the base itself, obviously. So that's the key area that we're trying to blend out. We also want to put some up here, otherwise it would look very strange. Oops. So we're just taking this around, making sure that this area here is well covered by the glue. I also tend to put a bit of a splurt of the glue in a paint receptacle, just so that we can have a bit of a surplus to spare, but we'll just pop a bit more there. This particular model, take some around the front there. Again, try not to go over the edges if you can. Just do a nice little run around, getting close to where you've done the basing. Sorry, where you've covered with the undercoat or the paint. Try and smooth some of that around. A bit of non-uniformity, that's the right phrase, is fine. Then what I've put in this plastic pot is a mix of it's just actually the Jarvis Sand and Stone selection, and all we're going to do is take our basing model, our base, put that into the paint mix, sorry, into the basing mix, knock it out, and we want to leave a generous amount on there. We're going to come back to that a bit later on and actually knock off the surplus. Best to leave the surplus on for now. And again, oops, what we're going to do is just repeat the process for all of the bases that we need to cover. And obviously I use Jarvis Sand and Stone. It's quite a neutral base once we get onto later stages. You can choose a much darker shade or a different shade depending on the type of bases that you're looking for, the type of effect that you're looking for. Clearly jungle or something similar to that, we might end up with a different look, but much of that we can cover when we get onto the next stage of the basing. At this stage we're looking to give some good coverage and to actually stop there being such a visible line between the end of the figure base and the start of the base that we've adhered the figure to. And again, try and go up to the edge of things like feet, but it's not important to get so close that you can't, that you risk putting basing material over the figure's feet or shoes. That's probably a little bit more than was required, but that's no problem. We're just going to wipe off a little bit of excess. Again, return to our basing pot, work the base of the figures into the pot and take it out. Put it to one side. And you want to give this a good sort of 24 hours to dry, really. Once I've completed all the rest of those, we'll come back and take a look at the next stage. Thanks. Okay, well, we've left our figures to dry a little bit, and what we can do now is just gently tap the bases, knock off any excess, run our finger round. Now, this sort of finish provides a good foundation for a number of other different ways to finish the base. You could choose to apply these self-adhesive flock sort of tuft packs, which come from a variety of different manufacturers, a variety of different styles and colours, depending on what type of vegetation they're trying to emulate. So that's a sort of summer grass effect that we've got there. You can also go quite different to perhaps the dark green. I tend to use these more for sort of skirmish games, but we will come back and use some of those a bit later. Of course, people will use perhaps larger sort of items. So here I've got some well, moss effect type material. You could take that off and glue a clump. Again, I tend to use that kind of finish more for occasionally for vehicles and perhaps for buildings, where you can obviously infer or make it look like some vegetation. There's a variety of different flock types that are available. This is quite a light coloured one, a Citadel mix, but you can buy this from literally anywhere. You can apply this with an applicator, or just take a handful and put that on the base with a bit of glue. However, I'm going to show you perhaps a little bit of a different technique, which doesn't mean that we can't do anything else in the future, but just gives a bit of an interesting foundation. Let's move those to one side. What I'm going to do is take a brown wash. Now this happens to be something that I've purchased from Bacchus as a special basing kit. The principle is fairly simple though. We've got a very, very watery but dark mix of brown, which I'm just going to give a shake. And what this does, we move this to one side, if we undo the lid, you can use this neat out of the bottle. If we take the miniature, what we're trying to do here is just run this in so that it soaks into the base. Now, again, what we're trying to do is get a nice coverage all over the base. Because it's quite watery, it won't matter too much if you go over the edge. And you'll notice that as I'm putting this on, it's tending to sort of seep into the sand that we've based the figure with anyway. What I tend to do is pick a style of basing that I think is going to suit the miniature or the army, and then try and vary it a little bit when I do different armies. I've used a lot of the sand and stone on its own for sort of Mediterranean type desert situations, where I've maybe just to put a little bit of flock on outside. The army that I'm basing here are Dacians, who fought in mountainous areas in sort of more Northern European type climes. And what we're going to do is we're going to leave that to dry, and we'll be applying a small dry brush to the surface once we've given it a chance to dry. Although this is a MDF base and it's quite watery, that won't cause any problems. It never seeps in. One of the benefits of putting the undercoat in the first place and then the glue is that really you're not letting any of that seep into the MDF base. So yeah, I'll do the rest and we'll come back again when everything's had a chance to dry. Hello, welcome back. So all the paint has now dried and we've got our sort of finished base coat. Now, just as a reminder, what I've done here is give you a bit of a compare and contrast. This is where we started with our base mix of Jarvis sand and stone. So if I can just slowly bring that up, you'll see the sort of effect that we're getting on there. And this is what we've done with the new base. Now, as I say, it depends on what sort of setting you're after, what sort of theme. You could very easily leave the Jarvis sand and stone and start to decorate, or we can take this now and start to perhaps do some highlighting. What we're going to do with that is a bit of a, well, I suppose people would call it a dry brush, which is effectively taking a paintbrush and just drawing lightly across the surface. And we'll take a look at that now. So what we do next is really up to you. what I'm going to do is show you a couple of effects, starting with just a highlight of the English uniform Vallejo that we used earlier. This is 921. I've also got this, which is the mid-coat colour from Bacchus, who provided this watery wash that we've used. As I say, you can make your own watery wash very easily just by taking some inks or some water-soluble paint, just mixing it down. What I'm going for here almost kind of brings us back to this sort of theme, but you'll see when we apply that you can achieve quite a little, a subtle different effect, and you'll also see a lot more depth. So what we're going to do is just give these two a shake, and then we're going to pop them into a dish. So I'm just going to squeeze out a couple of spots of each so you get to see the effect. And what we'll do is we'll just give this one a proper stir. This is I'm just giving the top coat, or sorry, the lighter coat, just a bit of a mixing. There you can see the two different, there's the darker version and the lighter version. Let's clean that up, scrape off the excess, put the lid back on for a moment. What I tend to use is a little piece of cardboard or similar. And what we're trying to do is get a very dry. So I'm just going to take a little bit of card. I'm going to take a brush. Now, your choice of brushes, depends on how comfortable you are with dry brushing. What I'm going to do is take this one, which is not particularly flat or anything, but it is quite flowing. There's not much resistance there. It's a clean brush, you can see. So if I take this one, for example, and pop it down, what I'm trying to do is get a very light dusting on the base. And you can see that that's just about lifting it. Now, that is providing a bit of a contrast, but not a great deal. Okay? But you get the idea with that one. Let's move that to one side. If I just wipe off the brush and retry with the lighter colour, you'll see the sort of effect that you can get. Let's just mix that around, put it on here. So now we're going to take this figure and very gently play across the surface. And you can see that it's picking out stones, just lifting that base a little bit. And we're not obviously worried too much about coverage. And you can see quite a nice little effect starting to form here. And you really don't have to go too crazy. As in, you don't have to worry too much about coverage. That's just picked out enough of the detail that when we compare that to the flat base, and I'm not entirely sure that you can see that clearly, but if we look at those two as a pair, we've just lifted slightly the model. There is a top coat that we can choose to go even lighter, so you can get, as I say, away with using a fair. And if you're not happy with the surface, I mean, I didn't think that was too much in terms of cover, just go back and put a bit more on. Okay, so now we've lightened the base quite considerably now, so that we're beginning to see a difference in effect. And as I say, it's up to you, the choice of colour, how much you do. What I'm just trying to do there is create a bit of relief on the board, and now you can start to see, hopefully, quite a difference there in terms of the difference that we've created. I'm not going to do a great deal more on these bases because I'm happy with that as a foundation. What I am now going to do is turn to a couple of extra products. I'm going to stick a tuft on, which I'll just bring that into focus. Which you can get from a variety of different manufacturers. This is quite a bushy tuft. You can buy them in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, as I explained earlier. And what we can do is just literally get your fingers, take the clump off, decide where you want to put the clump. Well, I don't know, we'll put him there. then what I tend to do is get either the back end of the paintbrush and just make sure the edges are firmed in, or just take one of our needle files and again just make sure that center piece is fully tucked in. Okay, so that's that sort of effect, and it just starts to create a bit of foliage on the base, so it breaks up that very sort of brown sandy effect. If I just return to the undercoat in a minute and just pop this one on, we'll just do this guy just for another little effect. So we're now just trying to pick out the effect on this one. As I said, I don't do this all the time with bases. Bases are a very personal thing. For me, it depends, as I say, on the choice of army, what sort of season, what sort of location we're trying to represent. But also, I like my armies to have different themes. So when you pull the armies out of the box, they've got their own kind of identity. So for this particular figure, what I'm going to do is take two figures actually. I'm going to take one of these slightly more plant-like, and you can see there's the sticky side of it. Let me just pop that on there. And again, I'm going to grab my trusty needle file, pop those in. Okay, so you get a sort of different effect here, and obviously on mass, you'll see that that's creating quite a nice little visual effect. Last thing to do is to grab some flock. I have a blend of flock that I've built up using a different number of flock types and manufacturers. This is a very bright blend. You can see that's quite a summery blend. Now, people use applicators, people use all sorts of things to get the flock proud of the base. You don't have to do that. Quite simply, it becomes an easy job to actually apply a little bit of this in an irregular shape. You can either plop it straight onto the base like I'm doing, or use a paintbrush. In most cases, I'll go back round with a paintbrush and just randomize the edges, but just make sure it goes in places that I want the glue to go. This one's got quite a bit of glue, so I'll make that quite a feature. And then what I'm going to do, grab a handful of the flock, tip it on to the actual section that we've coated. I tend to go for a big lump like that, and under normal circumstances I'd leave that to dry. If we shake that off, you'll begin to see the overall effect is quite pleasing. And if we look at that as a figure, and just step up there like that, you'll see that we're starting to create a nice theme to our bases. Let's just finish this one off. Give it a squeeze. So normally I would leave that, but just for the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to tap it off fairly promptly. We're not going too mad. And I don't know if we can effectively show you too well on the camera, but if we take these two and perhaps turn them around, if I were to move my fingers, you're starting to see that we're building up a nice little foliage effect on this unit. Doesn't take a great deal, but on the tabletop that's beginning to create a nice finished impression. And obviously you can mix and match. If I decided that this isn't enough, or I don't like the highlighting that I've done, well, you can just go back over it with the wash and you'll be back to this plain base. But if we compare two similar figures, we're getting a bit more depth from the highlighting, and we're obviously making the base a lot more interesting by the application of some of these basic features. And as you say, as you can see, that is a really quick process. Anyway, a few ideas there for you. As I say, feel free to decorate your bases as you wish, but I really do think that a nice theme to an army makes a huge difference. Hope you found that interesting, and thanks for watching. Hello, welcome back. I thought just before we finish the video I'd show you the finished unit in terms of how I've left the basing anyway. I've probably used more variety in terms of size of foliage, colour than I perhaps would normally do. Not convinced longer term that it's going to be a scheme that I'm going to stick with, but I'm happy just to show you the different types of effect for this video. Most of the tufts that I've used have come from Warpainter Scenics. As I said, no affiliation, and there are plenty of other manufacturers that do it. These guys I've just used over the years and they've given me a very good service. The types of flock that you use in terms of these tufts, again, loads and loads of different choices. These are 6mm sort of tufts. We've obviously got these bushier versions here. We've also got some very small 2mm tufts that I've actually added on. As I said, normally I'd probably go for a little bit more consistency in terms of choices, but I think it's very useful just to show you the types of effect that you can get. A lot of people tend to go to this level of decoration more for skirmish games. I just think it'll be a bit of fun. I've taken the liberty of doing some command groups as well, and as you can see, it does sort of tie the whole thing together when you use a common basing scheme. I've got another 10 or 12 units to go, so it's going to be a fairly substantial exercise when it's all done, but hopefully you found that informative. If you've got any sort of questions, pop your messages below and I'll do my best to answer them. But I suppose the real message, the takeaway from this video is just give it a go and don't be prepared to, don't be worried about trying something new. And pretty much there's no failures here. It's something that you can quite easily rectify, change. Worst case scenario, just peel the figures off the base and select a new style. Anyway, have fun. Thanks for watching.